Hey everyone, hope you're doing great today and thanks for checking into my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about whether getting a master's degree is worth it. Now, I recently posted a question online asking my friends and followers, what are some questions that you have about education, because education is something that I do. And so my buddy, Rodney, he asked me a question, hey, is a master's degree worth it? And honestly, that's a pretty tough question. It's basically an ROI question, a return on investment question, right? Is it worth it to go and get a master's degree? And so in this video, that is precisely what I'm going to answer. So as a person with 2 master's degrees and a PhD, I've done my fair share of education pursuing. One thing that I've realized in my years at school is that the world is getting more competitive. We're in an age of credentialism, where people feel the pressure to get more credentials to keep up in the rat race. Now, to break down the question whether a master's degree is worth it or not, you really got to break it down into 2 stages, right? 2 general stages. The first question is, what are the questions to ask before getting a master's degree? The second batch of questions are those to ask after you decide to get the master's degree and before you make the plunge and the final commitment to enroll into school. So in terms of the questions to ask before going to apply to the master's, the biggest one is really, what is your goal? Right? Because your goal will determine the outcome of how you approach this whole graduate school thing. If your goal is to enter academia, to do research, then try to go straight to a PhD from your bachelor's, because that is possible. I've got lots of friends who've done that while I was at Oxford. They went straight from their bachelor's to their doctorate, and pretty much by their mid-20s, they finished their PhD and they begun their career on research, right? Whether they went to research in academia or research in industry, that's a different matter. But what is your goal is very important. And if your goal is to enter academia, then where you go as a school, right? What are they strong at? What are the networks available there? And of course, you have to publish, because publish or perish is a reality in academia. So getting ready to publish, perhaps even in high school or in your bachelor's degree, is a very important thing to consider. And if you want to publish, that would also mean your supervisor is very important. Who will you be working with, right? And getting yourself to work with that supervisor while you're in your bachelor's degree is a great thing to do to set you up for your doctorate. And finding that right supervisor and working with that supervisor in your bachelor's degree is a very great thing to do if a doctorate is in consideration. Now, if your purpose is to learn, then I would say test it out first. Take some courses, read some books, and perhaps even audit some courses for your master's degree before making that plunge, because sometimes you think you really like it, but it actually might not be something that you want to get a degree on. Maybe it's just several subtopics within that graduate program that really interests you, and that's really all that you need to satisfy your thirst for knowledge. After you've done that and you realize that, hey, you know what, this master's thing, I kind of love it, and go for it, right? Why not? I'm always for encouraging people to learn, because when you take ownership of your own learning, you are empowering yourself to be motivated and driven to become a master in that aspect. And that's really how you want to position yourself in this modern economy of innovation, because mastery is essential to getting things done. Now, sometimes people enter their master's program because they want to network, right? Master cohorts are great because they hold you accountable, but at the end of the day, it really depends on the degree. So for a degree like the EMBA, people go specifically for networking. And when you enroll in that school with that cohort, essentially what you do is you develop relationships with people in that cohort, and when people go back to their respective companies after they complete their program, you have a wide network to tap into, and they can also tap into your network as well. The second big question that I have is, what is your life stage, right? If you are having a family, then perhaps a master's degree is something that you probably have to reconsider. So I want to share a little bit about my own story, right? When I got my first master's, my second daughter was just being born at that time. And at the same time I was applying for my first doctorate, I didn't get in. I got into another master's program, which I went to, and then I went to get my PhD. But basically, in the last few years, I've had 3 kids while pursuing 2 masters and a PhD. It took a huge toll on my body, and I actually talk about it in this keynote here. I'll put it up in the cards. And where pretty much my body crashed and I couldn't sustain it anymore, and it was a near-death situation. I probably should have paced myself a little better, but at the same time I don't really regret it because I do have the credentials now. The cost was quite severe, and to be honest, I was pretty lucky at the time to have the healthcare available to me when I was in Thailand. Another important thing about the life stage is that what are you giving up, right? When you're pursuing that master's, you're going to be spending a lot of time at school, or you're going to be spending a lot of time at home. For me, it worked out because my kids were young and they were toddlers at that time, and it really meant that I get a lot of time to spend with my kids. But at the same time, I was living in Korea while getting my first master's, and I was living in Philly while I was getting my second master's. It really didn't allow me to go out and see the city too much. I didn't really get to have the whole glamour of traveling the world and, hey, look at me, click, right? Like, none of that. It was pretty much I was school, home, kids, school, home, kids. And so that was what I was giving up at that time. I got to see a bit of the city, the cultures and so on, but that was pretty much it. That, in itself might be a sacrifice to some people. The third consideration in terms of your life stage is it really depends on your partner, because if you don't have a partner, then it's really not a consideration. Just go do whatever. In fact, you might meet your partner at school. But for me, I was married at the time. My wife had to take care of the kids, and during that time we were under a lot of financial duress. And so that is another major consideration that you have to ask. Another question about life stage is just overall stability, right? You don't want to rock the boat too much when your boat is already unstable. So for example, if you're new to a job, maybe starting a master's at the same time is not really a great idea, because you really want to settle in first and you don't want to rock the boat too much. If it's a part-time program, you want to integrate it into your life so that it works. If it's going to be a full-time program, then maybe starting a job at that time might be a good idea as well, because number one, you will need that financial stability. Also, some people like the chaos. They're able to overhaul things all at once and do everything at the same time and reintegrate it to establish a pattern. Some people like to integrate bits and pieces one at a time. So it really depends on you as well, right? But essentially, the main thing is to avoid overcommitting and not finishing, because if you start something, you really want to finish it. It's a lot of sacrifice. It's a lot of commitment in terms of time, finances, and just overall effort, right? So you really want to make it work. Another major question to ask before getting that master's is this something that you actually need, right? So if you are planning to make a career switch, how do you know that that career is going to be right for you? One thing that I found is some people decide to go get a master's, and what's interesting is that they ultimately not use anything that they learned from their master's degrees. So they went and got their master's degree, but then ended up not using it at all. So I actually know some people who has like 6 master's degrees, and I ask him like, hey, why did you get it? He's like, oh, because I'm interested in it. He has the luxury to do that, but not everyone does. So one of the questions is, is this something you actually need, right? If you're planning to make a career switch, how do you know? And perhaps getting some experience first before committing is a great idea. Also, in terms of a career switch, sometimes the portfolio is much more important than credentials. Of course, there are professional trades that require the credentials, and so I'm not talking about those professional trades. I'm talking about just general masters that you can do without. If you spend 3 years getting that master's, perhaps it would be better to spend the same amount of time to build a better and stronger portfolio. So one thing that I found is that a master's won't automatically get you the sales. It might get you through the door, it might make people listen to you a little more, but you still gotta sell, whether it's yourself, your product, or your service, right? You still gotta sell it. So perhaps sometimes a consideration is to spend that time to build that portfolio rather than get that credential. The best way to make it work is to build that portfolio while getting a credential and matching it together. And another important consideration is that your portfolio is really important because the networks that you build, whether you're in school or you're out of school, it depends on your portfolio. It depends on what people think and know you're able to do. Sometimes building that portfolio is more important. Getting that master's degree, sure, you get a master's, but so what kind of thing, right? And the last question I would say is probably the most important for getting a master's is really, can you afford it? Is there a scholarship? Is there a way to make it work financially? From my experience, some workplaces actually reimburse your master's degree. At my old workplace, they paid for half of my first master's. So that allowed me to work at the same time while also funding my master's, while also studying for my master's and being able to streamline everything. What I did in my master's degree was implemented in the classroom, and it really benefited the workplace as well. Pretty much it was a win-win situation for both the school and myself. The lucky thing for me is for that particular school, there was no strings attached. But I know there are other schools out there or other workplaces out there that require, 5-year commitments. If we fund your master's degree, you got to sign a contract for 5 years that you're going to stick around and work for us so that we don't just fund you and you go. So it really depends on your workplace and the amount of accommodation that they're able to provide for you to pursue your master's. So while I was at Oxford, I met a friend from Japan who was there to get his MBA at Said Business School. For him, he was very fortunate because his work in Japan was willing to pay for his complete MBA program there. And after completing his master's there, he went back and he got an immediate boost in salary and boost in opportunities at his workplace. So ultimately that depends on your financial situation, and it depends whether your work is willing to pay for that as well. So after you work through the 4 big questions on whether you should go get your master's or not, here are 2 major questions to help you figure out whether that master's degree is right for you. The first question is, is it a good school? And right now what we're finding in education is that there's a lot of schools being opened around the world and that there's a lot of choices available, and they're all providing high quality credentials for people to pursue their graduate degrees. So with more schools, there's going to be a greater emphasis on differentiating which schools are great and which schools are not as great, right? And so there are different ranking systems out there, such as the Times Higher Education ranking. There's a US one, US News one, and there's also the QS ratings from Shanghai. Pretty much all these different ratings are there to differentiate the schools. So if you're going to be spending money for your master's degree, you really want to get the best bang for your buck. So is it worth it getting a master's degree from poorly ranked university or versus a highly ranked university? And I know rankings is not everything. Some schools are focused and specialized on certain degrees, but at the same time, that credential is going to stick with you for the rest of your life. That's an important question to answer, right? Because essentially you are branding yourself and it's going to be on your CV. And like I said before though, portfolio is more important than your degree. But at the same time, it's the first impressions that matter. So it's a tenuous balance, really. So if you're gonna spend that money, it might actually be more useful to spend that money on getting specialized courses that will give you specific skills to help you build a better portfolio. It's at the end of the day, like I said before, your portfolio is very important. Another thing to ask is the network where you want it to be, right? So if you want to do business in China, right, whether it's your own business or you want to work, you want to go to the universities that matter in that place. So in the case of China, you want to go to Tsinghua or Beida, right? Tsinghua University or a Peking University, right? If you want to go to an American network, you want to go to Ivy League schools or equivalent. If you want to go to the UK or somewhere in its Commonwealth, right, the colonies that they've ruled before, an Oxbridge degree would probably be a little more useful because that's what their system recognizes. And so these are all considerations that you need to have as well in terms of the network. The second major question for this is it a useful degree, right? So one thing we're finding with education is that with the expansion of education, it's become a highly competitive market. And with highly competitive markets, what emerges are specializations, right? So some schools may offer highly specialized degrees, such as a master's of music of whatever XYZ, right? It gets very specialized. At that point, you really ask the question, is that degree worth it? Because it might become so specialized that it may not be relevant to a lot of other mainstream degrees. And in that case, you might as well build a portfolio for it rather than get that master's, right? So a major consideration is that a lot of these universities are competing for international and domestic students, and that they're in a race to pay for their administrators, pay for their faculty, pay for their staff. And essentially, probably the biggest cash cows out there are graduate programs, right? Undergraduate programs, there's a cap for it, but graduate programs, there's a lot of people who are looking to take the next step in their work. So graduate programs are very attractive for people to sign up on. And essentially, these graduate programs become cash cows for them. So like I said, there may be degrees out there that are so specialized that it's hardly relevant, but it might be relevant for a niche group of people. But the question you really need to ask is, will it be relevant for you? So there you go. These are the broad questions that you have to consider when deciding upon whether you want to go get your graduate degree or not. There's a lot of mini questions in between. It's an iterative and recursive process, which means that you need to, answer one question, you get more information, and probably go back and answer that same question again, over and over again until you get the right answer. If you have any questions about this video, someone probably has it as well, so drop me a comment below and let me know your thoughts so that it can benefit everyone. And of course, like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Take care.